All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Just Catholic podcast, where I'm literally just Catholic, and today I have somebody special with me, and we're just gonna talk. Audrick, take it away.
Hello, fine people. How's everyone's day been? I know you won't be able to respond, but I'm still gonna ask as if you're there.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't think they can hear us, but it's all right. It's all good. But, but yeah, I mean, me and Audrick go way back. When I used to live in Amboy, we used to serve in the same ministry. So yeah, Audrick, how's it over there in Perth Amboy?
It's pretty swell. Things are things aren't as controversial as they are around the nation, let's say.
Ah, nice and quiet down in Perth Amboy. That's
Comparatively speaking, of course.
yeah, yeah. Oh man, I miss it, man. I literally I miss Amboy. I feel like sometimes I feel a little homesick. That was my community. That was my home. So every time I get to speak with somebody from Perth Amboy, it's like a breath of fresh air.
Well, who knows? Maybe God will call you back.
Yeah, I mean if if things become good and things become actually affordable, I would be more than happy to. But I think right now Florida's my home, at least for a little while. Whatever it may be.
Understandable.
But yeah. So usually the way me and Audrey just speak, we just speak. If that makes sense. Like legit, we could just go on random tangents. So we might be hitting theology at one point, and then in another point we might be talking politics. We're not gonna get too controversial. Maybe we do. I don't know. I really don't care to that saying. I just as long as we're able to speak freely, who cares? But yeah, literally we're not gonna be partisan, we're just gonna be ourselves. And I explained that because some of us might not even be used to this conversation on a public level. I feel like a lot of the times people when they when they hear somebody talk in a podcast or they hear somebody speak in a video, it's almost seems pre-planned or like preformed. Like it's actually preformed, yeah, performed. Yeah, that's is that what performed preformed? Huh.
Did we really just figure that out in the middle of an episode?
Did we figure out the etymology of perform? That's insane. Preform, perform. Look at that. Words are amazing. Words. Preform. Wow, I'm still in shock about that. Yeah. So we like to put on a performance, and I don't know. I think this is great, and I think that last episode we were able to talk. I was able to talk with my wife. It was wonderful. We kind of went into our lives, our spirituality during Lent, and yeah, now we're just gonna sit and cut the breeze. Audric, you're talking to me about Thomas Aquinas. What's going on
Yeah.
with St. Thomas? As you know, I love St. Thomas Aquinas. I know you love St. Thomas Aquinas. So let's talk Aquinas. What were you telling me?
Well, basically, one of his most famous things, I think we can both agree, is his five proofs for God. And essentially, when you really think about it, it isn't really five arguments. More so, it's just five variations of the same argument. Mind you, it's a really good one because even to this day, it remains probably the most used piece of evidence people use to prove God's existence.
Yeah, and you know when St. Thomas talks about the proofs, right? It's not it's not scientific in nature, right? I think a lot of the times when we hear proof, we think microscope, we think like, hey, like we gotta hold down the matter to figure it out. But like these philosophical proofs that St. Thomas uses, it's a work in logic, right? Like especially I like the argument for motion the most, where it's like things move, right? And especially when St. Thomas talks about motion, he's not just talking about me moving a piece of cloth, but like things have changed. Things move, right? Doesn't have to be physically, but it could be like, the metamorphosis. It could be ripening of a fruit. Whatever it is, things move, right? Things don't move by themselves. Things often have a reason for their moving. We can't explain that forever. We can't just say that it is what it is. And usually sometimes when people are pressed with the argument from motion, right? And the question is asked, well, then, what moved this and what moved that? And it's, sometimes it gets to a point where it's just the way it is. But what St. Thomas says, and I think it's important, or else we end up in a contradiction. Okay, things are in motion, but there has to be something that puts something in motion, but it in itself does not explain, it doesn't need an explanation for its motion. Thus, we call God, right? Or in a more simpler term, the unmoved mover. The unmoved mover is very important to understand because, yet again, if God is creator, right? And we have to fall under the presumption, if we look biblically, that God created ex nihilo. He created out of nothing. Therefore, before God, there was nothing. God created the heavens and the earth, and God spoke it into existence, right? There's a great darkness, it says in Genesis. But I think, philosophically, we can go into the ex nihilo point where there was nothing. God spoke, and it began to exist. And God is God from the very beginning, and God is timeless. God is absent of time. God is absent of matter. God is absent of our universe. So God speaks and it happens. God moves, but doesn't need an explanation for his motion because God has always existed. There's never been a time where God hasn't existed, right? Anytime someone asks a question, well, what created God? I don't think we're asking the right question here because God is God. If we're asking what created God, then are we really talking about the the God? We're not, right? And I think that's the great mystery, that God can both move and yet explain, be his own explanation for his own existence.
Right. And then, of course, you have probably the most famous variation of the argument, which is the argument by design, which is what people still use. You have all these complex things that needed to be designed, and those designers also needed to be designed by something. So you have the prime designer.
Hmm. Yeah, the uh, the Octus Purus, as Saint Thomas explains himself. He's pure act in itself, right? So there's the I think it's Aristotelian. I'm not gonna act like I'm an expert in this, but I think it's the Aristotelian notion of um act and potentiality, right? And we all have gradations of potentiality and actuality, right? So we all have potential to do something, and what we do is our actuality. There's potentia, and then there's actus. Well, God doesn't have potential because God is already the potential that He is, right? There is no potential of God. Therefore, God is both His potential and its act itself. But if He's already His potential and He's already acting on His potential, therefore He's pure act in itself. He's actus purus, as Saint Thomas says, or even in a better, pithier, in a very, very, very condensed way, God is the sheer act of to be itself, as St. Thomas says. He's actus purus, he's ipsum esse in the Latin. God is to be to be. And I know this is kind of tough to even wrap your head around, but like God is.
Yeah, I am who I am.
Exactly. And that's what St. Thomas points out. He goes back to Exodus. No, not Exodus. It's when Moses sees the burning bush. I think it is Exodus.
Yeah, that's
Or
Exodus.
it's Exodus. Moses sees the burning bush. And Moses, he sees the burning bush and he goes, "Which God are you? Like which one are you? Like what is this, right?" And God says, "I am who I am." Right? And I think Jesus points it out a lot, right? When Jesus, for example, we just went through Good Friday, right? Who do you seek? Jesus of Nazareth. What does Jesus say? I am. Jesus points out to a deeper understanding, like, oh shoot, it's not just I am, it's I am. Like it's really cool that Jesus points himself out in that way.
Yeah, that I am in that is it, it's an entirely different phrase in that context alone.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
exactly.
it's not like I am like an unfinished sentence. It's I am
Period.
exactly.
I am. Like it's crazy because Saint Thomas talks about the divine simplicity, right? That God simply is, and that's the most simple. I think I explained this last episode. The most simple thing about God is that He's so complex, and the complexity is that He's so simple. That we've never experienced such simplicity because when we wrap our heads around it, it's not the simple that we think, right? It- yeah, it's awesome. That's
And
exactly what it is.
it's more so our lack of being able to comprehend such simplicity that makes it complex.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that the problem is that we try to put God on a leash, right? We try to break him. We turn God into a science experiment sometimes. I feel like we try to understand, not that it's not good to understand them, but I feel like we try to understand them for the wrong reasons. Because I think we've been so endowed with the scientific method that we want to basically take the idea of God, break it apart, dissect it, so that we can be able to understand it, which is fine. But the problem is that we want to seek that knowledge to be able to control it, and I think that's the fault of the way we were kind of brought up to think about problems, right? We don't we kind of lost the way to think about things in a way that retains its beauty. We kind of want to make it our own. We don't know how to just enter into things. We just want to subdue it so that we can like manipulate it to our own liking. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a failing among people as far as I'm concerned.
yeah, I agree, especially when we're talking about something as awesome, literally bringing about awe like God. Like it's amazing. But yeah, St.
But
Thomas Aquinas. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say it's also something that science, by definition, can't really prove
Mm-hmm.
because science deals in the realm of the physical, and again, by definition, God is in the realm of the spiritual, and science can't prove that because it doesn't have anything to test.
Yeah, yeah, and I think even further, it's like the chair trying to dissect the creator of the chair. It's like okay, like you can't really do that because the guy who gave you consciousness, or let's say in the form of man, right? The guy who gave you consciousness, it's very difficult to understand how consciousness is even created, right? Like, we're literally, our intellect, our reasoning is because we were created in the image and likeness of God. It's not something that we can create. We can't create consciousness. We can't we can program, but that's not something it's not contingent. It's contingent. It needs something else. Our consciousness needs to be given to us. We can't create our own consciousness. In the same way that a chair cannot create itself, in the same way that a fire cannot light itself, there needs to be a cause, kind of like what we were talking about with the unmoved mover, the actus purus, the uncaused cause,
And the
right?
necessary thing.
Yeah, the proof of necessity. Yeah. Huh. No. What else have you been thinking about, Audric? What's been on your mind?
Well, for me, that when we were talking about that, like for the first time, what was it? Had to have been like 5 years ago.
Probably.
Bef- uh, and I started looking into it myself, and I was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. This is like definitive for me. God exists, and here's why. But now, more recently, I was starting to think, okay, so how do I bridge the gap between there's a thing that is a god, and it's our god. You know what I'm trying to say? Because this proves that there had to be a god for the universe to exist. But how do we know that it's our version where he's all love and all that jazz?
Yes, that is a great point. That is a great point because really what the five proofs for God is supposed to do is supposed to, at least in this modern postmodern day and age, is supposed to shake you out of your atheism or even your agnosticism, to say, is there a God? There might be, there might not, right? So what it's supposed to do, it's supposed to kind of break a barrier so that you can ask these questions. So that's, yeah, absolutely. I think it's perfectly illicit to even ask it in that way, where it's like, okay, now that I can fathom the necessity for an unmoved mover, how do I know that my God is the God that I'm supposed to follow? How do I know that Jesus Christ is God? Right. And I think that once you get past once you get into theism, right? Because then there's atheism, anti-theism, and then there's theism, right? Now, now we can cross the Tiber, at least the first Tiber, to then get into Christianity, right? And I think that that's something that a theological virtue. St. Thomas talks about this. The theological virtue of faith. Faith is something that is not, as Bishop Barron says it, faith is not something that's below reason, but it's supra rational. It's beyond reason. So essentially, we're not supposed to leave our brains at the door. We're supposed to actually take our brains with us when we enter into Christianity. And I'm not saying you're not into Christianity. You're Catholic, right? You believe in Jesus. You believe in Christ. But I'm saying, like, for those that are crossing into that realm, it's like, okay, well, I in order for me to get faith, I have to ask God to help me to have faith, right? So I believe in a God. So now it's like, okay, what do I do with that? Okay, I have to ask God to help me to see who he really is, right? It's because I can understand a concept of him. So we go from the textbook to the relational, right? And they both need to belong together. I'm never going to put a distinction between faith and reason. There is no head to heart, right? They're all connected, right? I hate the notion, and maybe I'm talking too much, Audrick. You can interrupt me at any time, but I think I hate this notion of the separation between the head and the heart, because you know what? They're together. If you just run by your heart, you're gonna end up busting your head. If you just go by your head, you're never gonna feel anything. You need both. You need both the head and the heart to travel together to get you to God, right? You don't leave one at the door. God, God unifies them. It's an integration. The problem is that we have become almost pseudo Gnostics, and we want to separate the spiritual from the physical. And we want to essentially say that no, it's spiritual, it's all spiritual. Or we basically neglect the spiritual and we go, no, it's all physical. We need both. And I think that once you enter into that path of knowing, then you have the next step to enter into the path of, okay, Lord, help me to understand what it is, right? And then once you keep on praying, then you look with it. Okay, how do I know that Jesus is Christ? How do I know that Jesus is God? And it's about a journey, and it's about being okay to challenge and being okay to question. Because yet again, I think in the Hispanic culture that we grew up in, you never question your parents. You know, why do you want me to do that? Because I want you to, right? There's never an explanation for it. Well, that's that's not the God that we serve. The God that we serve says, I want to bring you about this adventure. I want to bring you on this adventure. Like, I want to explore it with you, you know?
And going back to your example of the Tiber, you cross the second Tiber, which is going from Christianity to Catholicism.
Yes.
which for me at least was rather easy. Because I don't know about you, but I feel like for both of us, we don't have that separation of head to heart like a lot of other Catholics might, because we came into it with reason.
Yeah.
And so I just logicked it out again. It was like, okay, well, who are the ones who got it right? Well, it's the Catholics. We have so much documentation going back to the very beginning that's like, okay, they these are the ones who got it right, because we
Hmm.
have more or less everything laid out already.
Yeah, and I think that when I first entered, or when I first started to have a reversion, right? I think in my life I had two reversions. One of them was from being I call them I call what I used to be a sacramental Catholic, right? And I think that in our culture, at least in my culture, it was very much, oh, you do the sacraments and that's it. You've completed your piece. I'll see you when you get married, right? And to me, when I entered and I did my confirmation, that was a big deal. First of all, because my first year teacher actually entertained my questions. We both know her, Bernie. She's she kind of helped me to kind of see that it was okay to ask these questions, right? Like I remember one time in my first year confirmation, I literally asked Bernie, I'm like, "Yo, how is it that how is it that the Virgin Mary can remain a virgin and yet still have a baby? How is that possible?" Right? And these aren't questions that most people are asking, but some it could have ended up two ways. She ignored my question. She didn't really answer my question. But what she really did was she said, "I'm going to take my time and I'm going to get you an answer to to that question."
Or she could have told you, don't question it.
Yes. Yes. And you know what? I respected the crap out of it. Because what it did was it helped me to see, like, oh my goodness, these people aren't loony. Cuz my perception of religion before I entered or reverted was essentially this. Okay, religion is when you need it or when someone dies. Other than that, there's no necessity for religion. Essentially, I was living the life of the pleasure principle, right? I do stuff for pleasure, right? And I'm not just saying pleasure in the sense of like, oh, have fun. I'm saying like I do stuff. I think I was more of a utilitarian, where essentially I kind of figured out which is more pleasurable, which is more evil, and I was able to balance my morality through that way. But as soon as I recognized that there's something about this Jesus guy, or there's something about Jesus of the Jesus that they talk about, there's something personal about it. Then I was like, okay, well, I'm interested, right? But for me, my true conversion doesn't come until I felt my call to the priesthood. And once I felt my call, I remember I remember Jesus. I remember hearing like Jesus telling me, "I want you to be a priest." And I go, Lord, if you want me to be a priest, I have questions. And a lot of the questions I didn't ask when I first started coming to God, I started asking now. I'm talking intercession of saints. I'm talking, why do we pray to the Blessed Virgin Mary? I'm even talking about the Eucharist, which at the time, before I felt the call, I wasn't really all that into. I recognized that there was something there, but I didn't understand the devotion because I really couldn't incarnate, pun intended, what was there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because hmm, a little, if this was a little beforehand, I would have been like, what is there? What is there to that? But now I look at it like, no, there's so much there that it's almost impossible to describe.
Yeah. Yeah. I think questions like I don't. I don't think we're brave enough to ask questions. Even to question our own, even to question why we do things. I think we like to leave it as is. Oh, it's, it's tradition. Okay, but why the tradition? You know? Oh, we do this because, that's what we did thousands of years ago. Okay, that's true, but why? There's a sentiment to it. And I feel like with Catholicism, there's always an explanation for it. And it always goes back to Jesus. It always goes back to the scriptures. And it always goes back to him present at the Blessed Sacrament. Like, that's what I love about Catholicism. It's the Swiss Army knife of our lives, right? Where if we have a question, we can just pull out the handy Swiss Army knife and figure it out, right?
which is why I'm Catholic.
Yeah, and I think it's beautiful because being Catholic doesn't just mean like, oh, just sitting down and praying. It's no, it's living out your faith, not just in the church but beyond the church, in your community, in everywhere that you are, being a good Catholic wherever it is. And I think that's what I love about Catholicism too, that it's not restricting, right? Like, we're called to be good Catholics wherever we are.
I mean, Thomas Aquinas spoke about that too. Being a good mechanic and being a good Christian is you don't separate the two, you do both.
Yeah, yeah, Vatican II emphasized that a lot too, like being a good Catholic where you're at. And to the point of like going back to the testimony that I was talking about, I, through discernment and through healing, I recognized that that call towards the priesthood was called towards a different priesthood, right? Because people who don't know my testimony, I went to various religious orders. I was ready to be a priest. Time after time, I was told no, you're not ready. One of them told me straight out that I needed to date in order to be able to even discern priesthood, which to me boggled my mind at the time. But what I didn't figure out, or what I figured out now, was that God was preparing me to be a husband, which I never thought would ever happen, which is why, I thought that I was called, I'm sold, right? And really, I get to live out my priesthood in a different way. And that's being a priest of my household. That's being a priest through my baptismal vows, because we all have the seal to be priest, prophet, and king. And that's sacrificing and living the sacrifice through my labor and through my offering of myself to my beloved wife. That's my priesthood. And I see God's plan all over it. And if it wasn't for that second calling or that second reversion, I don't think I'd ever fall in love with God in the way I did. So to Aquinas's point, and what he says, that why does God allow evil, right? God allows evil to create a greater good out of it. And I think that God allowed this discernment process for me for a greater good, which is my true vocation.
And to be completely honest, that you have to date first thing is probably for the best because it's like if you never dated before, then you really don't know. And so it's like, oh yeah, I'm probably meant to be a priest. But then it's like you find the person and then you're already in the priesthood and it's like, oh no.
No, yes, and it's true. We like, I was listening to he's a CFR friar. He's a Franciscan friar. His name is Father Benedict Rochelle. And at the time when I heard that, I'm like, what? Why? If why? Like, to me, in my mind, it was like, why am I going to do something and then just be like, oh, I'm going to be a priest because I dated. Bye, guys. See ya. Like, no. To me, it seemed messed up. It seemed manipulative. It seemed like something that I would have done for the straight up, just, oh, let me just try it out. And I think it was the opposite of love if I would have done that in that way, right? I think what God was preparing me for was for me to actually let go of discernment of priesthood and actually give dating a try. Because we because of the way I was thinking about dating, like I just when I first heard that, I was like, okay, all I have to do is just go out with a girl and just be like, okay, I think I'm good to be a priest. I'm good, right? And it shouldn't have it wouldn't have worked. In fact, I think that's not what God really wanted me to do. I honestly believe that God, what He wanted me to do is actually do what He told me in the very beginning, which was take it easy, right? I think in life we like to control our destiny, right? We like to be in control, you know. We like to say, I get to control where I want to go. I get to do what I want, right? When God is like, I'm a better author than you ever will be. Let me write your story. God gives us the freedom to act, but God is the greatest storyteller of all time. And if we actually let him act on our story, we end up seeing that the novel becomes more beautiful than we ever could have intended. You know, it's like the paintbrush dictating to the artist what it wants to be or what it wants you to do, you know?
And it's beautiful in that way that like before I would think, and this was a very recent thing. It was only like a few months ago that I came to a similar realization. Like, okay, well, there's God's plan, but then there's also free will. How do like that seems very contradictory, you know? But then, like it was only years of thinking about this problem constantly that it hit me like that. That it's like we are submitting to his will, and even though it's our own free action, he's guiding us through, and
Hmm.
that's they complement each other in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another argument, right? I think Calvinists still argue that we don't have free will. At least maybe I'm misunderstanding Calvinism, but like even the argument from free will, like yeah, we do have free will. For even though God knows what we're going to do, we still have a choice to do it. If that makes sense. Just because there's pre knowledge doesn't mean that there's control over that knowledge, right? God is not going to steer the car if you're crashing it towards a tree because you chose to crash it towards a tree, unless we let God interfere. But still, if you crash it into a tree, you crash it into a tree. Sometimes God can do miracles, but sometimes we're just retarded. We're just dumb. We just do dumb stuff, you know?
And it's almost like the parent letting the toddler like fall and scrape their knee because it's like it's almost like a lesson in that way, or even if it's not a lesson, it's just you have to let them experience life. You can't coddle them forever.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about parenting too. It's like what you're saying, like parenting. I think we have these things called helicopter parents, and we know about helicopter parents, where they don't let the kid actually move. They're stuck in a bubble. They don't really have the immuno defense to be able to actually take on the world until something hits them, and right away they just fall into a deep, like depression, a deep hurt. But it's because we haven't immunized them spiritually, physically, mentally, right? And even now, like that's why we see things like safe spaces, like because we have so become so involved in our kids' life that we don't actually allow them to be kids. And I think that's why I love God because God allowed me to make my mistakes. God allowed me to say, okay, you're not okay, you're gonna fall and you're gonna trip. Okay. Well, when you need the Neosporin, I'm here. You know? You're gonna like God allows us to be stupid so that we can come to Him and He can make us seem smart, right? God can turn the evil and make it into a good, right? God can turn the most shittiest stuff that happens to us and God can make something beautiful out of that.
Yeah, it's like before. You know how you said that you felt like a sacramental Christian before, right?
Yeah.
If I was to accurately describe how I used to be before I was in youth group, like to me, I was just straight up an agnostic atheist to be more accurate. Like I lived my life as if there wasn't a God, but I was like, I don't know. I'm open to the idea, but I'm gonna live as if he wasn't a thing. And
Yeah.
then randomly, out of the blue, my brother was like, "Hey, do you want to come to youth group?" Now, mind you, we usually don't talk like that. We're like I say what's up, he says what's up, and that's pretty much it for the day. And then he like randomly, like it was a Wednesday, I think. He was like, "Hey, do you want to come with me Friday?" And I was like, "Sure, I guess. Let's see what they got." And then it was like, I wish I could remember what talk it was, but it was one of Deacon Jose's talks, and it like really gripped me, and I was like, "Okay, there's something here." And then the second one was Bernie's talk about abortion, and I was like, "Okay, yeah, I like this. This I'm starting. The seed was planted at this point, and
Yeah.
then third time around is when I started talking to you, and that's it. Just I was pulled in, and I was never gonna come out of the, well, what would I call it? The Catholic spiral, I guess.
Let me tell you, the first time I came to youth group, one of my friends pulled me and said they were gonna have a movie. There wasn't a movie. I think the movie trip got canceled and they ended up doing a talk. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I can't watch a movie. I guess I'll just go to this place. And we were charismatic. So when I first got there, I think it was 2012 around there. And legit, I walked in and people were falling in the spirit. I thought I joined a cult. I wanted to dip, but it was still interesting to me. Something drew me to that, and I just continued going. And I remember desiring a relationship that these people had, right? I thought they were actors from the diocese paid to look good for the Catholic Church. I had that conspiratorial thing in my mind. I thought that Bernie and Deacon Diaz and Gerard, because Gerard was serving at the time, I thought they were all paid by the diocese to look good. But when I found that they did this for free, out of their own volition, out of their own heart, and that they actually believed the things that they were saying and they took it seriously, I was like, oh shoot, that changed their lives. Like something about that changed something in them, you know?
Yeah, when I first saw people falling in the spirit, I was like, why is nobody freaking out? Like everyone was just standing there regularly. Why is no one saying anything?
Everybody's passing out, and it's like, amen. It's like, what? What's going on?
Exactly. Like that was the thing that baffled me the most. I was like, is this just how it is?
Is this what we do? Oh my. No, and like even being drawn to the charismatic movement like helped me to try to like add meat to the bones, right? Because charisms aside, I mean, I think the charismatic movement was something that even today I can thank for evangelizing me. No charismatic movement, none of the what we have in Perdamboy really comes to be. And I think the charismatic movement is such a big deal, especially in our Hispanic culture in Amboy, right? Like we need the charismatic movement. The charismatic movement is important, but I think we become like a super force when and I think we're seeing it now. There's a shift going on. Like they're bringing theology into the spiritual, and it's no longer this disconnect that used to be, right? Because there was a perception back then where, oh, lead to all the thinky things back in the past, where we're really gonna feel the spirit, and then it ends up going, heretical. But what I really enjoy is like having the charisms and being able to tap into what the spirit wants to do in me, and also being able to explain my faith like Peter asked us to in his letter. What was? Do you know the verse in Peter?
No, I don't,
Always
unfortunately.
have an explanation for your faith, something like that. Let me see. Hold up.
What letter would it be?
It's the letter of Peter. Sorry, guys, we gotta search this up. We want to get this right.
Uh,
Because Peter always says to have an apologia.
Peter, where would it be?
1 Peter. I'm trying to find a. Okay, here it is. It's 1 Peter 3:15, and it says, "But in your heart revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect." And I think that's the motto for apologists, for people that are evangelizing. Like, always be prepared to defend. That's what we're called to do, and that can mean that can mean knowing the Bible, but that can also mean knowing that the wealth, the treasure troves of what the saints wrote about, especially Saint Thomas or Saint Teresa Lisieux. Like I found so much inspiration in the saints, and they always draw me back to, wow, a relationship with Christ is possible, even under the strenuous examples that they've been through, but even in a way that's beyond what we see. And I think that, in Catholicism, not only is it a one size fits all, but you can find your niche. You can find your place, right? Like, Catholicism takes in everybody. I mean, catholique, it literally means universal.
Yeah, I mean, like you have people like Melissa who who came in because before she was Pentecostal, and so she wasn't really all that about Mary. But now that's just her thing.
Yeah,
That's her niche now.
yeah, yeah. I mean, testimony after testimony. It's always like, I don't know if you ever seen this show. It's called The Journey Home. It was on EWTN. I think it's still on EWTN, but I would
What is
recommend it
that?
if you. It's EWTN is the Catholic network that was created by a nun called Mother Angelica,
All
and
right.
she's amazing. She was actually the first woman to own a television network. Our people. It's amazing. I
I
love
mean,
her. She's one of my heroes because she spoke truth to power. Like, legit, she would, if you were to talk something about Jesus, she would go in front of you and she will defend her spouse. That was her spouse. As nuns, they're spouses of Christ. And they're spouses of Christ in a, not in a different way, but in a more unique way than we are, because they consecrate themselves to Jesus in that way. We're also spouses of Christ spiritually because of, husbands love your wives as Christ loves his church. And Isaiah, your builder shall marry you. Christ is always coming after us like a husband comes after a bride. And so, yeah, there is a spiritual espousement, but as a nun there is a special espousement that's there. But yeah, she's amazing. She created the network. There was this show called The Journey Home, and it just speaks about conversion stories. People converting from Mormonism to Catholicism, Islam to Catholicism, Protestantism, Calvinism, like all the isms to Catholicism, and it's really nice. I would recommend watching it if you haven't. In
uh,
fact, when it
I'll
was,
have to get it then.
yeah, you can watch it on YouTube. Um, one of the things that was beautiful is that during, not beautiful, it is odd, but when I had my second reversion, I would just listen to these stories about people coming back to the faith. And while I was listening to it, I was legit playing video games. So I would just play it, like, legit. Every time I see the game Splatoon, I think about the journey home. I think about, like, listening to Bishop Barron or the Catholic Answers podcast or Catholic Answers. Like, it's ingrained in my head, but it was something that I used to do to learn. Like I used to listen to the journey home. I used to listen to the stuff just doing things. Like I would take hours and hour walks, and I would just put in my headphones and just listen to stuff about the Lord, listen to saints, what they said about Catholicism, what they said about Jesus. It's yeah, the journey.
They got any communists on there?
What?
They got any communists on there?
Any com? They, I think they actually have a communist. They have a communism. Yes, yes, Jose, perfect. They have a communism. No, they have a communist. I think that actually converted to Catholicism. Yeah,
I was half joking, but not surprised.
yeah. Well, the church took a hard stance against communism during Pius the XII, I believe. Yes, yes.
I mean, it only makes sense. Highly atheistic. The most atheistic country is China for that reason.
Yeah, and well, you gotta understand. Well, I think we know about Marx and Marx and his view on religion. Really, it's essentially communism is essentially a restructuring of society that is basically based on class types. So, like, what's the thing that, according to communists, distinguish class the most is the bourgeoisie and the proletariats. But the distinguishers, like according to Marx, it was the bourgeoisie who was using religion as a way to subdue the proletariats, right? It was a way to keep them in their opium dens, right? Religion was the opium of the masses, according to Marx.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much he focused on religion because from what I remember, he was mostly talking about economics. He wasn't really too much on the social issues. That was more other people's thing. But yeah,
Well,
that
well, he saw economics more. I mean, I'm not an expert in Marxism, but he saw economics more in a way to, like, economics became social, right? Economics is what connected everything, right? So economics became a way to, instead of God being an explanation, it became the successful versus the unsuccessful, right? And so when you view everything with that broad stroke, you end up painting everything red. You end up painting everything like in that certain way. And I think that's what Marx did with religion, because in order to restructure a society, you have to literally look at the structure of Western society, which is Christianity, at least in the Western society, right? Like, Christianity is what created the moral foundation for laws, even the moral foundations for the social foundations, the even some form economically. Our foundation is based upon religion, right? I'm not, and this is where we get political. I'm not saying that full fledged capitalism is essentially something that Catholics should adhere to, but a moral capitalism, yeah, right? Aquinas believed in a private property, but he also said that the excess doesn't belong to you, right? And that's something that Thomas kind of emphasizes. Thomas is not a Marxist, but Thomas is not a full fledged capitalist as well. And I think we see that when JP2 tries to draw the line between the two, because at the time, uh, John Paul II comes out of a communist country, and John Paul II could walk into a room full of communists and tell them their books verbatim, and he knew the ideology, and yet John Paul II never spoke towards a full fledged capitalism. Neither did all of Catholicism. Even none of the popes ever spoke towards, a full fledged, unfettered, uncontrolled capitalism. No, no, no. It's capitalism, but with a moral capitalism, right? And there's never been a moral capitalism, but there's never been a moral communism either, in terms of our view of economics. So, yeah, I don't know how we got into this, but yeah, Economics.
And while we're on the subject of JP2, my man, uh, I mean, we spoke about this before. How well you were telling me how he basically organized things in Poland that like they were scared of the man, this Catholic man, this one dude, because like he would talk against them and they couldn't do anything because the people liked him so much.
Yeah, that was the solidarity movement that he basically was for. I mean, he supported them quietly, but also out loud. But anytime, like basically, he had a relationship with Solidarity, which was the movement that was going around the. Is it the Eastern Bloc? Right? Would it be the
Yeah,
Eastern Bloc? Yeah,
with
yeah, 'cause
Poland, right?
yeah. But also on the other side of the wall, the other side of the Berlin Wall, like there was a movement towards that. But yeah,
Western Bloc.
Western Bloc. Sorry, JP2. That man is he's
A Marvel.
no yeah, he's a marvel, but like the man is a genius. And I say that because first of all he would read and learn languages at the same time. He'd put on headphones, learn a language while reading a book, right? In the same way that St. Thomas Aquinas would dictate three books at once about different subjects. Like God gave him an intelligence that's supernatural. He could remember faces, he remembered names. Like the man saw millions upon millions of people, but yet with some people he could remember where they were at what time he saw them. Like the man was extremely blessed by God because he gave himself to God. But I think like GP2, and this is what I'm learning now. I'm learning about love and responsibility through JP2. So I'm going back to it. I had read it before, but I want to start getting into it again. And one of the things about love and responsibility is it's a philosophical book, and it explains about the danger of utilitarianism. Do you know what utilitarianism is?
Yeah, it's basically a system of like what's moral is whatever like feels good and whatever does the least harm is the best.
Yeah, yeah, it's essentially balancing the pleasure principle. And the problem is that we tend to bring that into morality, right? So we tend to mix the two. So whatever's pleasurable must be good, and whatever brings out pain must be evil, in our minds. But the problem is that when we run our morality by the pleasure principle, excuse me, when we run our morality by the pleasure principle, what happens is when it becomes good for me and not good for you, it becomes good in general. So when you bring that into the realm of sexuality, a lot of the times we run by our relationships by the pleasure principle. And we tend to not see the person as person, but we tend to literally objectify the person, right? We tend to only use the pleasure principle to distinguish value in people. And I think first of all, before we get into the sexuality, we do this with our friendships. We have a priority of friendships already. We say that this friend is good, and I think John Paul II talks about the three types of friendships, right? There's the friendship in utility, which is the friendship of hey, you help me, I help you, but when you no longer can help me, I drop you like a bad habit. There's the friendship of like desire, where we're both really like football, but as soon as the football season is over, deuces, I'll see you next season, right? And then there's the authentic friendship where it doesn't need an exterior cause. It's just good. It just seeks good for goodness itself. And when we bring that type of friendship into a spousal relationship or even a relationship between boyfriend and girlfriend, right? What happens is that let's say let's say my friend pisses me off. I'm not going to drop them like a drop of a hat. Let's say my friend doesn't like what I like. I'm not going to drop them. I'm going to love them for who they are because they are who they are, right? It's the personalistic approach, it's the humanist approach. It's personal, it's humanist, it's personalist, it's more organic. And when we bring that into the context of sex or sexuality, what happens is that we're able to not only see sex as a way of expressing pleasure or just basically knocking each other's rocks off, we tend to see the love which drives that love which drives us to see beyond the pleasure, right? Because more importantly, we have Jesus as an example. The greatest act of love came about through the greatest evil, right? Where God was literally killed. We killed God. And God used that evil for a greater good. And in the same way, we're called to die to ourselves to bring about a greater good. And that means even dying to the things that I want for the sake of giving it to the other. Or even further, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, to love is to will the good of the other. What do you think?
Yeah. Uh, Although I would add one more type of friendship to that list, the friendship of accessibility. The friend that you make because you sit next to them in class.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. That's true. That is another friendship that you see.
And it's not like you drop them because you drop them at the drop of a hat. It's more so you might even want to stay friends, but you don't see them anymore, and that's why they're gone.
Hmm. I agree. I agree. But yeah, I mean, is there anything other topic on your mind before we leave?
I say we get controversial for this last bit.
Ooh, let's go.
What do you think about evolution?
Oh, oh, that is okay. Okay. Um, I am a son of the church, so I don't just say that because I have an opinion about it, like in terms of like a controversial opinion, but I say that because I'm open to evolution, right? As long as it distinguishes between the evolution of the body versus the immortality of the soul, right? The soul is something that doesn't evolve. The soul is something that has always that it can't evolve. It's not something that does evolve. It's something that comes about in the person. It's the anima. It's what animates the person, right? It's the thing that brings life to the body. The body itself can evolve, but the soul cannot. So I can see aspects of evolution. I think believing evolution is okay, right? I mean, it's okay. I think that evolution in its principles are right. I think some things are still off. I don't really understand it as much, but when it comes down to it, I mean, as long as you're not, like I said, with the caveat of the soul, I'm perfectly fine with it. I love science. I think science is great. I think if anybody's really anti-science, I'm not saying science in the political manner, because even when I see science now, it's like, oh my goodness, the science. We think Anthony Fauci and COVID. Oh gosh, but what I'm actually saying is that science in discovering the natural reasoning for things in terms of nature and matter, that's perfectly fine, right? As long as they're staying in their lane, you know, like Science can tell us what a painting is made out of, but science can't tell us why a painting is beautiful. Science could tell us how physically we came about, but science can't tell us why we're human,
Right.
you know?
Two things. One, my faith in science is second only to my faith in God.
Hmm.
That's how high of a pedestal I put science on, which is why I put so much credence on it.
Yeah.
And secondly, the way I see science is I see it as just an extension of Adam. We're naming things. That's it. God
Mhm.
made the thing. He made all the different functions. We're just putting a name on it.
Yeah. No, that's that's completely correct. And you know what? That's why they call Adam the first scientist. I don't know who said it. I know I've heard it somewhere, but yeah, Adam is the first scientist. That is fascinating. Yeah, that's true. Huh. Yeah. Well, with that being
Wait,
said,
wait, wait. So I want to elaborate on my personal belief on evolution.
oh yes,
So,
please.
uh, for you and for everyone listening, what I'm about to say, uh, isn't necessarily Catholic aligned or scientifically aligned. So don't quote it like gospel, please. If I'm proven wrong, I can always be proven wrong on any of this. This is just from my understanding of what I've read from scientists and what I've read from Catholicism, what I understand to be the truth. But I'm no evolutionary biologist nor a theologian. So, with that being said, more or less, evolution, as far as I can see, is completely correct because, in the physical sense, because every possible explanation argument I've seen against it was very easily debunked. All the physical arguments were very easily debunked by knowledge that we've had for decades at this point. And it's like you said, the soul is basically the only real question about evolution. Like, oh, does the soul evolve? No, it doesn't. I can answer that because a scientist, like purely, like not even if they are Catholic and they're just answering it in a they're answering it in a scientific sense. The soul is a spiritual thing, and science doesn't comment on the spiritual. So I'm gonna have to say I don't know. And in that case, that's where theology takes over. No, it doesn't. And that's why I believe in evolution because it's like science doesn't contradict the church's element of the soul doesn't evolve, which is why I think it all works out. And now this is my bit of this is where might be proven wrong by either a theologian or an evolutionary biologist. God more or less in the same way he did what I believe what he did with the Big Bang theory. God, when he was designing all the animals and whatnot, he just sort of like, okay, here's the first bit of life, here's bacteria, whatever. Let's just see how this goes, and then he just let it rip, right? And then eventually there was a thing that was very similar to us, the Homo sapiens. But whenever the first like group of like the genus Homo came about, that's when he was like, okay, this is this is the one that I'm gonna choose because he put a consciousness in that consciousness being soul, and then from there it evolved to be his
Mhm.
image. And yeah, that's what I see. Could always be proven wrong, but that's how I see it.
No, I could see it in that way. I also I think with people who take a sort I call it pseudo literalism because I think if we take a literalist approach to the Bible, we're not really reading it correctly. They'll take a literalist approach to the seventh day creation cycle, which, by the way, if you do ascribe to that, okay. But for me personally, and I think that even the early church fathers speak about this, where the 7 days aren't actually literal, and even Genesis, when it speaks about the creation narrative, it's a story, and not to say that it's fake, but that the authors of Genesis are using the story to kind of explain how not only how Sid entered into the world, but how God is perfect and how he created the world, right? Like God, in the beginning was the logos, as John says, the logos meaning the verb, the word itself, right? And then that logos incarnated, it became flesh. And so God speaks and it happens. It speaks to the majesty and power of God. And it also speaks to how God created and how God can make things happen because his words are so powerful. And even that is the reason why we can even talk about the Eucharist, right? Right, with the miracle of Jesus, and Jesus being Logos incarnate, and him saying, "This is my body," and it happening. And I think in the same way when we speak about evolution, right? Okay, as long as we delineate between the soul and the body, go ahead, right? Because yet again, as theologians, right? I'm not a theologian. Yeah, I'm hoping to be a theologian soon in about 2 years. Love you, Jesus. Uh, as a theologian, right? We're not going to enter into the science. We can use science as a way to explain or to have people think about theology, but science is not going to explain theology. And in the same way, science is not going to explain. I mean, theology isn't going to explain science, right? Science isn't going to explain theology, Or as Dwayne the Rock Johnson once said, "Know your role, jabroni." But yeah, guys, do you have anything else, Audric, before I head into the outro?
Nah. We could leave the rest for some other time when we decide to get more controversial.
Absolutely. Next episode, episode 2, Revenge of the Controversial.
Is that what you're gonna call it?
I don't know what we're going to call it, but hey, there's always room for a part 2. It's been a pleasure, Audric. We'll talk soon. God loves you, and we'll see you guys later. Bye, y'all.
Have a good one, people.